Well, what a great opportunity for me to be here. I was here last night during the auction, and I kept being introduced as Matt Blunt's father, and there are worse things that could be said about you than that. I will tell you that. Matt did a great job as our governor. He's doing a great job as an NRA board member. I'm glad to join him as he and I both welcome you here today. And I've already told my good friend David Keene, if you come back again, we're not only proud of the attendance record we're setting this year, but we'll set another attendance record the next time the NRA comes for their annual meeting in St. Louis. But thanks for being here. Thanks for all of your help. You know, probably one of the great endorsement days of our Senate campaign in what's usually an incredibly competitive state was the day that Wayne LaPierre and Chris Cox spent with me. I just saw our friends, the Potterfields, back before I got on the stage, who have Midway USA firearms, and the best single endorsement event I've ever had anywhere was at their location in Columbia, Missouri, where in that location and another handful of locations in a big day with Chris and Wayne, Missourians came out and understood that we were going to have and did have and would have the full support of the NRA and Missouri sportsmen in a state where that really matters. So thanks for that, and thanks for being here today at a critical time as we think about what we need to do to defend constitutional government. You know, Wayne LaPierre, at a speech he made, very well received speech at CPAC this year in Washington, that conservative meeting that people come from all over the country to hear our conservative leaders. Wayne was well received, but one of the things he said in his speech, he was quoting Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, when asked about a country that wanted to form a constitution, her advice was, well, if I was you, I wouldn't look at the United States Constitution, I'd look at the Constitution of South Africa. I heard other speakers earlier talk about how important it is who serves us on the Supreme Court. And those Supreme Court justices need to understand that our Constitution is our Constitution. And it means what it says. And we have to protect it, and we have to defend it. And that the oath that I take as a senator and the oath that they take as a justice of the Supreme Court to defend the Constitution means just exactly that. It doesn't mean to rewrite the Constitution. It doesn't mean to seek out something you like better and apply it in another Constitution. It means to defend our Constitution. You know, the constitutional government in the country today is almost ceased to function. We're having this big generational election, a big debate about who we're going to be for a long time, and the Senate hasn't had a budget in 1,000 days. I'm in the minority in the Senate. I'd like to be in the majority in the Senate. We haven't done, the annually required budget hasn't been done in 1,000 days, and the government's just not working. Now, the regulators are fully functional. And I don't go anywhere in our state or anywhere in the country that I don't begin to hear about the regulation that's going to raise our utility bills, or the silly regulation that the Labor Department proposed recently, where the Labor Department was going to decide what farm kids could do on a farm. You know, my mom and dad were dairy farmers, and as I recall, the rule when I grew up was I could do anything I was big enough to do as long as either my mom or dad, one, said I could do, that I was big enough to do it. And then there was another rule that I didn't like quite as well, which is I could do a lot of things I really didn't particularly want to be big enough to do yet, if they thought I was big enough to do it. And that's worked that way for a long time, and it's worked pretty well. We don't need the Department of Labor deciding whether a farm kid's big enough to drive a tractor on the farm, or there's this one rule about you couldn't gather the livestock. Now, I don't recall my dad ever saying, let's go gather the livestock. We gathered the eggs, but we didn't gather the livestock. You couldn't gather the livestock until you were 18. Now, I don't know if that meant that the livestock weren't emotionally ready to be gathered by somebody who wasn't 18 yet, or you weren't emotionally able to gather them, but That's the Department of Labor. And then the Department of EPA not only has rule after rule that make it impossible for us to do the right thing for the environment, but they also had a rule they talked about for a long time about fugitive dust, where farmers couldn't let the dust from their farm go to the next farm. Just one level of nonsense. Fast and Furious, by the way, would be a fast and furious example of the regulators. In fact, the regulators are not only fully functional, they're beyond hyper-functional. In that great movie Spaceballs, that many of you have seen more than once, and I have too. In that great movie Spaceballs, there's one speed above hyperspeed, and somebody just said it's ludicrous speed, and that is the speed that the regulators in America are at right now, and we need to get them under control. About once every generation, we decide who we're going to be for a long time. This is one of those times. You know, Matt mentioned Thomas Jefferson earlier. When Thomas Jefferson in 1800 saw the government differently than Adams and Washington had, and that was a big moment. It was such a big moment that for a generation, for 28 years after that, we refer to the country, if you remember your high school history or your college history, as Jeffersonian America. And it wasn't just an idea about who we were going to be in government, but it was an idea about who we were going to be overall. And there are touch points throughout our history that prove that about once every generation we have this kind of big debate. And the moments would be Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, Ronald Reagan, and that retooling clock has come around again. In fact, President Obama, when he was Senator Obama, said almost exactly 4 years ago, he said, you know, Reagan was a much more consequential president than Clinton. Now, the Clinton folks didn't like that at all, but it happens to be the one statement that President Obama has made that I agree with most completely. Reagan was a more consequential president, partly because he was Reagan and he was going to be consequential, but partly because 1980 was one of those moments when we decided who we were going to be for a long time. And that's what we're doing right now. No matter who was president, whether it was Reagan or President Bush or President Clinton or President Bush again, the side panels of who we were going to be were established in 1980 in a way that defined the debate for a long time. And we're doing that again right now. And essentially we're deciding, are we going to be Europe or are we going to be the United States of America? Well, let's hope we decide we're going to be the United States of America. The lines are clearly divided here. One side believes that the government can make any decision for you and your family better than you would make it for yourself, and the other side doesn't. It is that traditional and age-old American fight. Are we going to have more government and less freedom? Or are we going to have more freedom and less government? Well, let's be sure we stay on the side of more freedom and less government. Let's not be like everybody else. Let's not go down that path where we decide the Constitution doesn't matter, the amendments don't matter. You know, the Second Amendment matters, the First Amendment matters. We just had a pretty good debate in Washington about whether the government can make you do health care things that violate your faith principles. Not that violate my faith principles, but violate somebody else's faith principles. And the answer is no. Thomas Jefferson, we'll mention him for the third time here in about 10 minutes. Thomas Jefferson wrote the New London Methodist in 1809, and he said, of all the freedoms we hold most dear, we should hold the right of conscience most dear. We should not have a government that can make you violate what you believe. Now, for those of us who believe in the Second Amendment, we also have to believe in the First Amendment. For those of us who believe in the amendments, we have to fight for the Constitution. This is a fight about, are we going to be like everybody else, or are we going to be the United States? One of my favorite stories from the Senate campaign was in 2009. I was outside the Iron County Courthouse, not too many miles south of here. The Iron County Courthouse has been there a while. There's some cannonballs that were shot into it during the Civil War, and not in a friendly way. But we're standing there where you can see the cannonballs in the Iron County Courthouse. And my Iron County coordinator, Tony Harbison, who was the Farm Bureau chairman and mostly a tree trimmer, frankly, I had lunch with him one day this week. He said, you know, when I leave somebody's yard after I've worked on the trees, I like it to look like nobody's been there except the trees look better. And he said, you know, if there are limbs to be picked up, we pick up the limbs, and if there are leaves, we rake the leaves, and if there's a rut in the yard, we roll the rut in the yard. And he said, my boys have always had to work for me. As I said earlier, my mom and dad were dairy farmers, so I quickly got that whole involuntary servitude thing. My boys have always had to work for me, and more than once they've said to me, Dad, why do we go to all this trouble? Why do we do it this way? Nobody else does it this way. And he said, every time they said that to me, I looked them in the eye and said, son, if you do it like everybody else does it, you're just everybody else. Well, we don't want to just be everybody else, and that's the decision we're about to make in this country right now. And I saw in the magazine that came out right before the convention that David Keene's article was headlined, All In. Well, if I'm right, this particular moment won't come around in quite this same way for another 25 or 30 years. I may not be quite as vigorous then as I am now. I intend to be all in. I intend to do everything I can to see that we decide to be not who somebody else is, but who we are. The greatest, freest country in the history of the world, the United States of America. God bless America. Thank you for letting me be here. Thanks for letting me be here with you in St. Louis. Thank you all.